I'm gonna grab a drink real quick.
Oh, hey guys, welcome to another episode of the Mind Muscle Connection podcast. And today I have Jordan Lips back on the podcast. I think we are around maybe 5 or 6 now, somewhere around there, but it's been a couple of months. I think before the summer is the last time we chatted. So thanks for coming back on again, man. And I guess for you, is there anything that has gone on the last couple of months on your end?
Yeah, man. First of all, thanks for having me. I love our chats. It's nice that we do like a bit of a recurring thing though. It's always fun. It's the same old for me, working on the group program, new mesocycle just kicked off, just making sure that everyone's taken care of there. My own training, I had a little podcast recently about an experiment I'm doing where I'm just keeping my training essentially exactly the same until something happens. I think we just like have, I'm sure you do a similar discussion with your clients when it's time for them to get a new program. You have to decide how to make that new program, which means you have a decision in front of you of like what to change and what to leave. And that discussion is part physiological and part psychological. And so I just want to test the physiological bounds of how long can I keep doing the same thing and progressing, and what will be the thing that ultimately tells me to change something. Like, am I actually ever going to run into a physical plateau? Will I run into joint pain first before I actually don't PR? And so if you're interested in that, we can talk about that more, but you can also just go listen to the podcast if you want a lengthier discussion on that. But I'm on Meso 3 of that experiment. And so far I am on track to PR again on everything for the third mesocycle. And I'll take any amount of a PR as a sign of continuation. And so far, yeah, obviously psychological boredom tends to be, I had this discussion many a time, but that's by far the thing that is going to make us change things first. That's already kicked in. That's already, if I was not doing this experiment, I would have changed things already based on like enjoyment, but I'm going to see how far I can push off that feeling of like, well, I just don't enjoy this. I want to change it. I'm going to try and see how long I can push that to the side, see what happens.
Yeah, no, that is interesting. Like you said, is it going to be more physical in terms of what you're going to see first, or is it going to be more psychological? And like you said, you're already kind of noticing some of that. I guess just staleness around like, is it motivation to go work out? Is it like, are all the above there with that?
Yep. It's already, I mean, I'm already sick of it. I already want to change it. So that's already like, I'm acknowledging that is for everyone going to be the thing that happens first is psychological boredom, some amount of wanting to change. I'm just deciding not to take that variable into account, and interested to see, how many people out there have been lifting for a decade and have actually ever plateaued on a lift, like outside of like power lifters, maybe who are like pushing absolute peak strength. How many people have actually plateaued on a lift and really plateaued, not like a couple weeks in a row where things have, didn't progress. I'm talking about like a full mesocycle where you look back and you're like, I didn't make any progress. And there's a lot of there's a lot of confounders here. Is your nutrition the same as it was last mesocycle? Is your sleep the same, stress the same? So obviously it's not a perfect experiment. But I'm trying to keep as many variables the same to really take that into account.
Yeah, and it makes me wonder too, like, I feel like those likely are both gonna play a role in that as well too, where it's like, again, are you, like you said, are you actually physically like plateaued? But I do feel like the mental side of things definitely can cause you to probably plateau sooner than you would want to. But that is a good experiment for sure, because I feel like this gets brought up a lot, and this was actually one of the questions I had today, was kind of about like changing exercises and stuff like that. But I think, again, this is something that people probably overdo a lot. And I'll save that question for here in a little bit. But I guess for you then, how long are your like mesocycles that you're doing this? Are you able to maybe push it out a little bit further now, or are they shorter? What does that look like while
I'm
you're doing
keeping the
this?
same structure, just as like that's a variable that I'd like to keep the same. So usually 5 weeks of training, 1 week of a deload, but I'm taking my deloads a little bit more from an autoregulatory perspective, where I might take some fewer days or more days depending on how I'm feeling. And one of the benefits you could implement in terms of deload is an intro week where you spend that time working on new exercises, getting the setup right, just figuring out calibrating loads for week 1. Like sometimes that's like whatever. Personally, that's my preferred method of deload, especially for clients, is to spend that time working on some new stuff. That isn't the case for me, obviously, because it's the same stuff. And so, I usually will go in and not just go randomly through the motions, but that part of it is not there. And what I found, I guess, again, we could go into deep as we want on this, but is like, those first couple of weeks where you're calibrating your efforts. So like you're calibrating RIR, you're not really sure if it's, you're trying to get relatively close to like hard, but not too hard, in that like 2 to 4 RIR somewhere on average. That is an extremely easy thing for me to do now because I have so much data on last mesocycle. It's very easy for me in like almost a formulaic way, take 3 steps back to take 5 steps forward, 3 steps back, take 5 steps forward. I could literally just pick whatever I did for week 3. And if that is how I wanted to do it from a formulaic perspective, it'd be very easy for me to be like, hey, I'm going to start on week 1 where I was on week 2 last time, let's say. And then from, I'll make 1 week's worth of progress every mesocycle. And at minimum, that's what I'd like to do. But, a lot of times I find that there's people like doing something new and they find that fun. When I say people, I mean myself too. I mean, that is 100% true. I actually had to change 1 or 2 exercises out of like 16 to 20 exercises. I had to change 1 or 2. I had to go from bilateral to unilateral on something, whatever. And even just doing that, I felt noticeably like more enjoyment doing it. So I'm totally with that. But there is another thing that I think people aren't realizing is fun. And it's showing up to your sessions on week 1 of a new program, knowing what weight and reps you want to do and knowing the setup and knowing the technique. And I'm finding that like, even like, a lot of times we throw this on Gen Pop. We're like, oh, Gen Pop. When I say Gen Pop, I mean, let's say like non-competitive bodybuilders. There's like 99.9% of people where they're like, oh, they're just like, they want all this novelty and they need all this new stuff and they need all the shiny stuff. I'm watching Gen Pop regular folk who are interested in getting strong and building muscle. And it's not necessarily just like an average, just person off the street. It's somebody who cares about hypertrophy to some degree, but they're showing up to their week 1 session doing the exact same shit as they did last mesocycle, but they have they open up their sheet and it's like intro week or week 1. It's like they have the weight and the reps that they're supposed to start at, and alleviating that problem. People are like, holy shit, this is fun. Not having that problem is really nice. Feeling confident about exactly where I'm going to start and exactly the setup. And I don't need to spend 2.5 weeks sending back and forth form videos. At the end of the day, let's say you have a 5-week meso. It's going to take you at least 1 week for all exercises to confirm that you're doing this right. And obviously, the more you've done something, the longer you're doing it, the shorter this time scale. But if you're new to an exercise, usually it takes you 1 to 3 weeks to get the weight and reps in a ballpark RIR wise that you want, your technique to really iron out. You have a 5-week meso, let's be conservative, say it takes you 2 weeks. That's 40% of your meso that you spent doing suboptimal training. I'm not saying you got no benefit from it, but 2 out of the 5 weeks you'd say weren't perfect. If you ask any of my clients what their best weeks of training are, it's usually weeks 3 and 4, 3, 4, and 5, right? 1 and 2 are like working out some kinks. That's 40% of your mesocycle. If you keep those movements in and you do them again for another mesocycle, all 5 of the next weeks will be good because you're not going to spend any time on that shit. Now you have 2 weeks out of 10. Now that time spent working through the kinks is down to 20%, right? You extend that to 15 weeks, it's 2 out of 15, right? And so that percentage of time you're spending figuring this out goes down. The percentage of time you're doing really high quality training goes up. And I don't mean that to make it seem like it's a huge deal. It's not like those 2 weeks are 0 gains. I just mean that it's mental effort that you can save and also probably higher quality training. At the end, if you look at the entirety of the meso, obviously downside is you're doing the same shit. There's psychological fatigue that goes on, but not talking in absolutes. There's a little bit give and take. There's some gray area. There's room for a change. There's room for continuity, but just understanding that like continuity is both probably better from a physiological perspective because you don't have to waste time neurologically figuring this movement out. You can get into really good effort. And there is a psychological fun to not having to figure that stuff out. And so just weighing those in when you're kind of making a program, I think is important. Obviously, I'm taking it to the fucking nth degree here, but just for fun, just want to see, am I ever going to plateau or am I literally going to just be like, I don't want to do this ever again, ever. And I need to change it, even though I'm progressing.
Yeah, no, that'll be really interesting to find out. And I agree. I think that is always the tough part, is kind of figuring out like where to start out, and then even to like figuring out, how to set up the machine, depending on what you're doing, how to set it up. And then again, finding that technique. And that definitely takes a little bit of time. And like you said, that really just increases the training quality, like at least time spent having really good quality. Cause like you said, it's not like you're not going to be making any progress when you take time to figure out how to lift, but it's likely not going to be you're not going to be maximizing that yet. It's going to take some time, like, to figure out the technique and whatnot. So for you, is this something that you are doing just for yourself, or are you also implementing this in the group as well too?
Yeah, it's a good question. I'm not taking anybody else's mentality to this degree. Like I'm
Yeah.
not taking anybody else's program to this degree, but I will. It's funny. I just it's what you always do, right? I mean, your client makes the choice. So when it's time to build their program and we're having chat about it, I'll discuss what I just said, and they will experience this fun of pulling up their program, opening it up on day one. They get their spreadsheet, they open it up, and bang, for the first several times we do this, I'll put the estimates in for them. I'll be like, hey, I'm going to look at your data from last meso and I'm going to give you an estimated ballpark starting point. And when they open up their program and that ballpark starting point is there, I think a lot of times, not all the times, but their need for novelty, they forget about it because they're so excited about not needing to. A lot of people are a little anxious, a little bit weary, less confident going in the gym, especially when they're not exactly sure what to do. And so giving them the power of knowing exactly what to do because they know the setup already, they know the technique, and now they know weight wise where they're going to start. To them, that actually really kind of that bridging of confidence, that feeling of anxiety goes away. And it actually is something that's really fun. And actually, I end up having clients being like, wow, I really want to keep more things the same. It just comes down to like having a slightly higher standard for taking something out. It's like just raising the bar of when I'm going to take something out.
Yeah.
Because I value the continuity physiologically from a gains perspective, but I also value the continuity from a plug and play, open up my program and know exactly where to start perspective. But we still change things. And sometimes we'll look at like some of the less stimulative movements and we'll just use that as an opportunity to just like inject a little novelty. So obviously like, so I hate saying the art of programming because what we do isn't as it's not art. I mean, on some level it is, but that does come down to like the art of coaching, art of programming there.
Yeah. And to like you said, it for some people it gives them that like less anxiety too because they know what to do, and that definitely, I mean, I feel like that's something that it's not a large thing it's not gonna play a massive role in your workout quality and things like that, but that's another just kind of piece of the puzzle there that if that's in line, that just makes everything a little bit easier. So I guess then my question to you is, what for you then, what are some of the exercises that you decided to include in this, and kind of what was your rationale behind that?
The ones that I just wanted to build this one program for.
Yep.
Yeah. I wanted to pick exercises that I thought would have a long time scale of enjoyment that I didn't think I'd get, that I already know I enjoy a lot. That was like a big one because I was like, and to be honest, I was wrong about some of them. Unilateral work, and maybe intuitively I showed unilateral work. I'm very quickly, the time scale in which I want to swap it out is much shorter. I'm ready to, I had to get rid of I was doing thoracic lat pull around, which is unilateral, and I was doing an iliac lat pull around, and I was starting to get anxiety about that day because it was taking so fucking long. So I had to do one of them bilaterally. I just wasn't going to show up to the gym anymore. But I really was emphasizing variations that I thought would have a long time scale of enjoyment. Certainly that reflect what I enjoy doing, like just certainly reflect also like what I want from a results perspective. But I didn't like pick something I'd never done before, let's say. I maybe picked something I'd never done this much in a row, like a cable pressing I've always done, but like I don't think I've ever done the same cable press for like 3 to 4 mesocycles in a row. It had been something that I threw in because I was like trying to learn education wise, experiment with new stuff. But never something like an incline dumbbell press, which I'm sure in my lifespan I've done many times for 5 mesos in a row. So I wanted to keep the cable press in, stuff like that. So definitely things that I enjoyed. If I could go back and do things differently, I would have done a better job at that. I probably would have chosen no unilateral upper body work. And this is all me. First of all, unilateral work is fucking unbelievable. I'm lazy as shit in the gym. I'm starting to just have over my lifespan, again, generally less enjoyment. I still love working out, but like if you told me that the pull around is a little bit more optimal because it lengthens a lat a little bit more, I might just be like, I don't give a fuck. I want to do the bilateral version because that's just me. I'm going to be able to do this without hating my life more. I'm going to be more excited to do it. So, and we all have different thresholds for that, but I probably would go back in time and I would get rid of the thoracic pull around as well. But I'm going to continue with, I added a chest support to one exercise that didn't have one. But other than that, I kept things the same. Good amount of cable work. The only thing that is changing a little bit over time is I'm adding in a little bit more leg work, which I know is a confounding variable for sure. Just because of some of the high systemic fatigue of some of those movements. And I'm taking that into account and I'm making sure that it doesn't change that much. My ankle is getting better and better. And to be honest with you, for the last year and a half, I hadn't really pushed leg hypertrophy at all. I trained legs, but with big air quotes, because I was playing so much soccer. It's like being in season as an athlete. Like I wasn't trying to make strength and hypertrophy adaptations. I was trying to perform well 3 times a week playing soccer games. And so I'm not doing that right now. And my ankle's just good enough to train really hard legs. And so that's something I'm really excited about doing. Frankly, I really want to see, just test that muscle memory. I took a before picture and it was just like, whatever. I'm not shitting on myself and just laughing because I know where I've been. I was like, you have 0 leg muscle. And so it would be fun to see where that goes in the next 6 months or so. I don't want to ramp up the leg volume so much that it fucks this whole experiment up. And I'm just like, yeah, you're not progressing anymore because you introduced all these like high systemic fatigue exercises across the week. That is now the limiting factor. But again, it's not a perfect experiment. I'm going to draw whatever conclusions I have. And so far it's been, the only downside of the experiment is I'm taking a small break from like what I was enjoying prior, which was using my own training as a canvas to just practice new stuff. And that's just not something I'm doing right now, which I'm okay sacrificing, 6 to 12 months on this experiment to get to learn some things there.
Yeah. And I can totally relate to the unilateral stuff. I'm the same way as you, as I've gotten more, I've trained more and done it like consistently for some period of time too. It's like, I definitely feel like I've gotten like super lazy in the gym. It's like anything that requires like a long setup or like it takes a while to get, I'm just like, dude, I don't want to freaking do that anymore. It's like, I want to get in and out in like 45 minutes or so, just go in, do your work and then get out. Because I think really you realize you don't need to spend really any more time like doing that. Everything else you kind of do in there is almost not, I don't want to say a waste, but it's like you can just be way more efficient with your time. I don't know about you, but did you used to like spend hours in the gym like when you were younger, like as a teenager, early 20s? Like I would freaking spend way too much time in there, and I think it just was like you felt like you almost needed to do that in order to see progress.
You didn't have any responsibilities then, what I mean?
True.
Like
Yeah.
I'm in the gym now, like the minute I get in there, like yes, I can turn my brain off a little bit, but I'm like, I want to get back to making content, or I want to go back to, answering form videos, or I want to go back to servicing my clients, or I want to do something else. I want to go for a walk. Like I want to get out in the sun or something. So it's almost, it's not that I'm enjoying it less. It's just there's more shit on my plate. And I know that when I'm a father, let's say in the relatively near future, I'm going to go down to the absolute minimum effective dose of training. I'm going to, my next experiment is something that, if you have Brian on again, Brian and I have talked about this of like, what is the minimum effective dose for us? And I will be flexing that, whatever it is. If it's 2 or 3 times a week, full body, can I maintain muscle on that? So that'll be the next experiment in the future at some point, but I'm certainly trending in that direction. Plus there's also, this might be a hindsight thing. Maybe you didn't think of this when you were 20, but I'm thinking it now. It's like each workout that I do, like we're reaching the asymptote here. We're on the tail of this graph where each workout is doing less for me in terms of growth. Like that is just a fact. I'm closer to my genetic potential, which I don't think about ever. That's not how I think about it. But the more muscular you are, the less muscle gain per workout you're getting. And so that's in the back of my mind too, where I'm like, my thirst for getting much bigger and more muscular is lower, but maybe that's also confounded by the knowledge that I'm not going to get much bigger. And so maybe those 2 things obviously, intertwined, can't really disentangle those 2 things. But that's also a feeling I have. Like there's just your motivation for training used to be get super big and jacked. Now it's like, stay healthy, stay in good shape, maybe get a little bit more jacked over time. Also make sure that I keep doing this so I'm educated enough to do this for my work and experiment with. I mean, there's so many different motivations now that like you can do all those things in 45 to 75 minutes instead of 90 to 2. I mean, I used to spend 2 hours in the gym working. It's just crazy. Bullshitting. I'm sure there's not net 2 hours spent working out, but yeah, definitely for sure.
Yeah, that's an interesting point you bring up too about like, part of it being just as you learn more, it's like you realize that like you're not going to be like making these massive amounts of like gains either. It's like and two, I don't know, as you were saying this, it made me realize too, it's like maybe part of that is like I realized that like with building muscle, you can't really like speed up that process. Plus, as you get more advanced, like you said, it slows down a little bit. So it's like, hey, I don't necessarily feel like I need to spend all that time in the gym now, because it's like spending that long is just not going to get me any closer to that. It's just going to take away from everything else that you mentioned. And two, it's like you can be, I think learning how to be more effective with what you do, I think helps with that for sure too. But yeah, definitely knowing that you can't like speed it up. I think that was maybe one mistake that probably made me think that back in the day was like, oh, the more you do, the more you can like speed this up. And again, that is true to an extent, but it's like once you get past a certain point, it's like you doing more is just honestly going to bring you further away from trying to get more jacked.
On a more positive note, I would say that I also am at a place where I get more out of less, where, we talked at the N1 practical. I mean, the only compliment that I will always hold near and dear to my heart from Adam was that, like, he's like, you get a lot out of every rep. He's like, you look like you're really in the muscle, like neurologically efficient. Like every rep I'm doing, I know what I'm trying to accomplish. I'm in it. There's no wasted effort. There's no wasted ounce of pressing and technique breakdowns that incorporate other muscle groups. Like I'm really in it. And I really, it's something I like. It's something I am focused on. It's like every rep, I want to make sure I'm getting the most out of it. I'm in it. We're not going through the motions. Doesn't mean every set's to failure, but I mean, every rep is with intent, let's say. And so I definitely have experimented with higher, lower volumes. And I do feel that there is an efficiency that has a part to play, where the more advanced you get, what I get from a set close to failure and a brand new person gets close to failure, I'm getting way more stimulus per rep, per set. And so I lean on that a little bit as well.
Yeah, no, and I think that's part of just getting better at what you're doing, right? Is becoming more efficient with every little thing that you do, and then you find that you actually don't even need as much as you did before either, because you are just getting more. You're just getting more out of every single rep, right? And I think that probably is partly why we could go and train for 2 hours or be in the gym for 2 hours, is because there was a lot of, we talked about this in the past, junk volume. There probably was a ton of junk volume that just, it wasn't where it needed to be. And also on the N1, definitely been noticing you a lot more on some of their stuff. And so you've been, I feel like you've been all over them lately. But no, I'm the same way as you too. Like definitely still really enjoy working out. Like it's part of my day and I love doing it. It's just like you said, it's like, you find, I think, other things as you get more advanced to where you don't have to it's not all about just like working out. There's other things as well too.
I also think in the same vein of trying to get more from less, I've leaned into training a little bit on average closer to failure. Now if you look at from an optimal gains perspective, what you're really thinking about when you think of optimal gains is what is the best stimulus to fatigue ratio in terms of exercise and reps in reserve, when I can get the most gains. Because my goal is not the absolute most gains. My goal is to get good gains, but mostly from an efficiency standpoint, a little bit less sets, a little bit closer to failure is a trade that you can make. Now I'm actually taking it a little bit further than that. I'm going not all the way to failure, certainly not, but I might start at a 2-1-0 in week 1 and progress to like a beyond failure myo rep edition or an eccentric edition or partial edition into week 4 and 5. Because my volume is quite low, not quite low, but I'm doing 4 exercises per workout, let's say, 3 to 4 sets of each. So anywhere from like 12 to 16 working sets, which is, I think, moderate. But, you see programs out there that are like 20 to 25 sets, 30 sets in a workout. We could call it low. In order to counter the number of sets, each stimulus per set should be higher if we're trying to equate total gains. I'm not trying to equate, but I'm trying to hedge that a little bit. So starting a little bit closer to failure and being okay training to failure more often. Now the counter is, hey, training to failure is not the best SFR. It's, you could get relatively roughly equal gains in that 2 to 3 hour. It's okay. If you take a lot of these studies, by the way, when they look at like equating, they equate for like if you do a set of 8 when you could have done 10, you might need a second set of 8 where you might get out of those 2, you might get whatever it is, an X amount of stimulus. And I might get 70% of both of those sets combined in 1 set to failure. Now I'm okay with that trade. My point is 1 set to 2 RR and 1 set to failure are not equivalent in terms of stimulus. You get more going to failure. I'm not willing to flex doing more sets at a lower RIR at this point, if that would equate / give me better gains. It's not something I want to do. I have a time restriction. That is my absolute number 1 highest threshold is time. I don't want to spend longer than X amount of minutes in the gym. How can I get the best gains within that time within staying within my recoverability? Well, I have to do less sets because I have a time allocation issue. And if I'm going to do less sets, I still want good gains. On the average scale of things, I'll be a little closer to failure. And starting a little closer to failure has led me to training really hard sooner in maybe a week 3, where I would have been training in the week 4.5, 5. And then maybe even going to failure on a lot of things in week 4 and maybe beyond failure in week 5. And you could say, SFR, not the best. I'm like, yeah, I don't care. I'm not doing more sets. And so in order to keep the stimulus of the sessions high, and to be honest, because you're doing less sets, not to ramble too much, but because I'm doing less total sets, I can recover from harder sets. And just experimenting with that. It's not, I'm not, it is something that I maybe am leaning into across the board with clients and with, I just thinking about my group, there were a couple exercises where I'm like, you know what? Fuck it, man. We're not starting with this like 3 to 4 RIR bullshit on like on a lateral raise or a bicep curl. Like you're just not, it's not systemically fatiguing. Like, let's get, how can we cram more quality stimulus into the entirety of the mesos? Maybe we start closer to failure. So what? Your bicep curls are to failure. You're going to be okay.
Right. Yeah. It's not like it's gonna knock you, like you said, the systemic fatigue of that's just not gonna be the same as if it's like a squat or something like that. And this is a thought I had too recently. It's like I think a lot of times people search for like optimal hypertrophy and like try and get the most out of it. But it's like just because you're not optimal doesn't mean you're still like not seeing like progress either. I think we get too caught up in like, oh, what's the optimal? But it's like you still, just because you're not seeing optimal doesn't mean you're not seeing progress, like muscle growth or fat loss or whatever it may be at that time. For you in this kind of experiment too, any like, have you found progress to maybe slow down as you've gone further into it, and any like minor injuries, little aches or anything? Just because to me, I hear that, and like the biggest concern for me would be I tend to sometimes get some like elbow tendonitis, things like that. Have you had anything like that pop up or anything like that?
Yep. Dumbbell pressing my left elbow, but I'm not at a place where I think it's I'm not at a place where I can say it's chronic. Maybe the last like 2 weeks, it's just something that I'm really acutely aware of, but not at all to a point where it's like, oh my God, I can't do this anymore. Not even remotely close to that. Nor will I let it get to that point. But to be honest with you, like these sort of like general overuse, little niggles that come up, like I know what is at this point feels like overuse under recovery chronically. And I know that if I do back off, it will go away. So it's not that I'm going to push it to a point of like getting like tearing something but I'm almost interested to see if that pain increases. Like, is that actually what's happening? Because I want to know, hey, on meso 4 of doing this, meso 5, meso 6, I still feel great or I don't. Is joint pain a real thing that's happening? Like, is that really something that's happening to people when they keep exercises the same? And so, yeah, that is something that just is creeping up. Third meso incline dumbbell press. And what's interesting is like we fucking learn all this biomechanics stuff. And as for a clavicular press for your upper pec, you're going to want a slightly more adduction, a little bit more tucked elbow, lines things up a little bit better with the clavicular head of the pec, whatever. I'm finding that the more I tuck, just sometimes it comes with a little bit more elbow discomfort and a little bit more shoulder discomfort, and with a little bit more abduction or letting the elbow flare a little bit more, it alleviates it almost like 100%. It's like black and white, night and day. And so that is just interesting where I'm like, yeah, but biomechanically, I'm like, Jordan, tuck your elbows, tuck your elbows, tuck your elbows. But then I'm like, this hurts, like just straight up hurts. And when I untuck them for 1 rep, I'm like, this feels unbelievable. You know, and people are, oh, you did too much abduction. You get your elbows super flared up like 90 degrees. You're like, okay, you just, you're going to mess up poor shoulder mechanics. We could talk about the kind of just which exact muscles it's working a bit more than others. But, and I would not recommend fully abducted up at 90 degrees. But when I untuck a little bit outside of what might be biomechanically optimal, all of a sudden it feels fucking awesome. And so just reminding myself to that, like, make sure I'm not just saying shit online and just saying shit to my clients. Yeah, I just want to make sure that I'm not just like regurgitating shit that I learned or heard, and that like I'm making sure that like that I actually can, we talk a lot of people, evidence-based is more than just what you know on a skeleton and what you know in a research paper. And so just taking that into account a little bit. But yeah, the elbow on the dumbbell press. But we'll see how that goes.
Yeah, it just kind of sounds like, obviously there's, you might learn something and like that might be the best for most people, but you also have to kind of take that individual into consideration as well and potentially make some adjustments if something just doesn't, like if a certain technique just doesn't feel right for you. And I think people do get married to certain exercises and certain like techniques when it's like, hey, you might have to adjust that slightly for yourself if it's not working for you. Cool. So I think that's pretty much everything on that. I guess one thing I wanted to bring up too was, have you found too that like, and this is kind of a thought I had with a client who, they kind of mentioned, hey, they've been getting heavier on a certain lift and they start to notice some pain. And plus for me and myself, like as I try to really overload and I do the same movement over a while and, you start to get like a little bit of elbow tendonitis. Do you ever find that you have to kind of like maybe like recalibrate a little bit in terms of like technique? Is that something that you find is pretty normal and something that, yeah, I guess you find that you do with clients regularly and yourself, where it's like, hey, I continue to push this weight. I keep overloading, adding weight, feels good. And then all of a sudden you kind of get to that point to where it's like, okay, I probably need to recalibrate a little bit here with my weight and technique and stuff like that.
Yeah, it hasn't happened yet, but absolutely there is a gap of time between, there's a period in which you've now progressed via compensation, right? You've progressed via shortening the range of motion, or more knee bend in your RDL now, or more hip, momentum in your lateral raise. And we sometimes aren't the best at judging that. But I think that's a simple, not simple, it's simple to say, but just filming yourself, holding yourself to a high standard. It hasn't happened yet, but oh my God, it happens every day in the group, where that's just something that people haven't done before. They're finally, and it's partially my own doing, where like you've shown them the light of progression, of like trying to progress week to week. Yeah. And then they go a little bit too far and like, I have to progress every week, regardless of what it costs me, or range of motion, poor technique, added momentum, whatever. And then you have to pull them back and be like, okay, like you don't need to progress every week. You shouldn't progress if it costs you those things, unless it's prescribed. We're actually doing a cool progression I like with overhead presses, where we will progress into leg drive, right? We will progress, once you're getting to a point where you're hitting, if you don't progress 1 week, then you will force progression via turning it into a push press with some leg drive. So if you're like being, if you're progressing into partials, you're progressing into momentum based reps. I mean, that's fine if it's prescribed that way, but yeah, totally. That absolutely happens. Absolutely. There are moments to step back and be like, my technique has slipped. I've been trying to do more, and that has caused me, I've been overvaluing doing more, and at the cost of some part of my technique. Absolutely happens. Totally.
I feel like with my training, it's just like sometimes just kind of happens out of nowhere, where it's like, damn, I've been going up so much, and now it's like, okay, I gotta kind of recalibrate this a little bit. And then I find that it ends up, I mean, you can probably start a little bit higher, but then it ends up just feeling better to actually kind of drop weight for a little bit. And I'm sure there's times, maybe during a deload week or an intro week or something like that, where that's going to make a little bit more sense. But I'm sure too, at some point, if it's getting to the point where it's so bad, you might even just have to do it mid meso too, which probably isn't ideal, but sometimes that.
Oh, that definitely happens though. No, that definitely happens. Absolutely. Yeah.
Cool. And then you said your ankle is getting better. Everything's improving there as well. I know it's been a little while since you injured that. So
it's all right. I mean, it's I've heard I'm nervous that I'm never, like, I don't care what the time scale is. If there was a genie that said, hey, Jordan, if you do all the right things, you're going to get back to feeling how you were before this injury, I'd sleep fine. Just have that like lingering thought of like, it's like, not to bring up COVID, but it's like people who get COVID, I'd be more nervous about like lingering symptoms. Like if I'm sick for a week or two, if you tell me when I'm done, and I'm going to feel fine, I can live with that. But I'm reading a book or whatever, and the main character in the book, literally last night, I looked at Jen, I was like, fuck. He's like talking about how he, whatever, who cares? He was like talking about this like ankle injury in his 30s that like never healed right. I'm like, God damn it. Like I'm 31 and this is my ankle injury that I'm nervous about not healing. And so I'm working with I'm working with Active Life actually, which is online physical therapists who are there. What they do best is get you back to sport, like returning to sport, sport being weightlifting or powerlifting or hypertrophy or actually sport. And so I'm taking it seriously. Physical therapy is fucking boring as shit.
Yeah.
Plyometric work and like eccentric loading and actually getting to like absorb impact and be more explosive is style of training that I do not enjoy doing. That's just not fun at all. But I'm going to go all out and I'm just going to deal with it. And I just want to get back to, I'm happy that I can do lower body training. It's just like magnificent, super happy, but I can't run. I could run, but I can't cut. I can't sprint. I can't, whatever. So
is it just like tight, or it just feels weak, or is it just
there's restricted range of motion, restricted dorsiflexion, and definitely like weakness for sure. It doesn't manifest so much in resistance training. If I'm not pushing peak dorsiflexion, if I'm like doing a leg press with a low foot position, then I'm absolutely limited by range of motion before I'm limited by like musculature. But those are exercises that I'm doing for range of motion. I'm not actually doing those for quad growth, let's say. I'll pick other exercises where that's not a limiting factor, and I'll be, all right, I can push hard here and actually make gains. And then I'll move over to like my single leg calf raise and, a stationary split squat where like I'm more concerned with the range of motion loading.
Gotcha. Yeah, injuries are a pain. Are you going to go back to soccer whenever it fully heals?
Oh yeah, definitely, 100%. But I will probably consider continuing some of those things that I was doing specifically for ankle health, I will probably, I say that now, but I think that I'd like to continue to keep some of that in. Because I do miss that. So it is something I miss playing soccer. And I know that if it costs me some direct strengthening work and I have to take out something elsewhere and that's a cost that I'm willing to pay, then I'll probably do that.
Awesome. Yeah, it's all about trade-offs, right? And figuring out what's most important to you, I think, and you definitely get better at that, I feel like, over time too, in terms of what you want to do. So let's roll into a few questions here. Like I said, I have about 6 to 8. We probably aren't going to get to all of them, but I want to try to get through a few here. So first thing is, so top things you've changed your mind on training wise in the past year. 1 to 2, I think is going to be more than
Yeah.
enough there.
Yeah. I think the volume thing, the maybe for the people that I work with, the population that I work with, that if you had to give them the optimal training plan, that they wouldn't be able to do it because of time. That a gentle shift in less volume, less time, but a gentle shift towards closer to failure potentially. And in some cases, not fearing the SFR argument because, like with certain exercises where they're maybe hardest in the short position or they're a single joint movement or they are just inherently low systemic fatigue, like just not being afraid of going closer to failure on the spectrum on those things. Definitely something that I've changed my mind on over a bit. But maybe the other thing would be also this introduction of like making sure I'm not just saying shit. I think like I love N1. The whole point of, I mean, I'm really credit a lot of them to like my biomechanical knowledge. But also I work with hundreds of people right now in a group, and I've worked with thousands of people over the last decade. There's information in there that is important that I don't want to override because of just like a sentence that I'm regurgitating now. Something that I talked about recently was like for like rear foot elevated split squats, at the N1 discussion. And I'm just gonna say this is like what N1 has said is like, or what was taught to me is like putting your toe down on plates or a small step, keeping the toe down improves stability in the back leg and lets you produce more force in that back leg. Those two things are technically true. Practically, I'd say I want to be fair and say it's split down the middle, but I'd say 50% of people when they go toe down, if they've never done it before, their technique blows and they feel super uncomfortable and they're like, this is weird and I don't feel more stable. And, then you put them on laces down on a bench, which has like been crucified and their technique is like plug and play, pristine. And to be honest, I'm biased because that's how I feel when I go toe down. I'm like, my toes starting to slip backwards, and I'm thinking about producing force in the back leg, which generally I don't want you to be thinking about too much. I go laces down on a bench, I grip it, I rip it, I pick up the dumbbells. My form's amazing. I don't think about it too much. Stability wise, I don't feel a difference. So it's not just about me. I'm also thinking about people that I've seen, and so just making sure the shit that comes out of my mouth, like am I just saying this, or are there caveats, disclaimers, and additional context I can add to this statement? Or am I just fucking, are we all just, Kaz has had this super wide reach. You follow a lot of your favorite influencers. There's stuff that they are just fucking regurgitating and they're just saying it. They're not thinking about it. They're like, yep, this is it. This is how it's done. That's it. And so just being more comfortable with challenging some of those beliefs, I guess.
Yeah, no, I think that's part of being, what actual evidence base is, right? Like you learn things, but also you figure out what works in practice. I feel like this has happened to me a lot lately too, where like you give general recommendations on social media and again, you're going to try to give the best general recommendations as you can, that's going to be beneficial for people. But there's going to be cases where it's like, what you say might be a little bit different than what you actually do, like for a client. Right. And like, I had a group Zoom call with clients and it was like, hey, you kind of say this is the optimal amount of protein, but I'm doing this. And it's like, well, obviously this is what we want to try to aim for. But in practice, again, like some people, if they go from like 80 grams of protein, it's going to be hard to get them to eat 160, 170, right? So it's like, yes, ideally that's what it would be, but we also have to take you into consideration. And there's certain things. And, that's, again, just part of being evidence-based is like, knowing the knowledge, like having the knowledge, learning it, but also learning how to be able to apply that like in specific situations and practice is also key too. Same thing with like the rest times too, right? Where it's like for building muscle, we say, 2 minutes or so, but it's like, I'm sure there's cases where you have people that don't rest for like 2 minutes at certain times, right? Like depending on, hey, maybe you're newer to training, like you don't necessarily need to rest 2 minutes. The weights you're using just it's not going to be conducive to rest 2 minutes or longer, right? Something like that.
Well, what you just said right there is a good kind of indicator of this concept of if you're a new person to training, you probably are using lighter weights and you don't need to rest as long. And on the flip side, practically speaking, you might also feel, hey, actually, I want this person to get in the habit of resting a bit longer, because as they do get stronger, to try and unravel this like go, go, go mentality, because you can, like, I might still come to the conclusion of like, yeah, you might not need 2 minutes. Maybe you could do 90 seconds, but I'd rather you be over recovered
Right.
to do this, you know? And so you play both sides of the equation. Like, physiologically, we get to say stuff like you're not as strong, and so you can afford to rest less, let's say, on average. But then you're like, but I'm not going to have you do that because practical reason XYZ.
Right. Yeah. Just get them to slow down. And like you said, maybe for them, they've always been that kind of go, 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 and they just got to do something. So with them, you do want to probably push, hey, let's just make sure we're rested in between sets. And that's definitely a big thing that I see for sure is people just under rest, or always try to be doing like something in between sets. That's kind of how I was like, I feel like that's kind of how they like, when you like first get into training, this may have changed now, but like textbook and like just the types of training that like when you have to sell is like, it's like, you want to be doing like stuff in between rest and stuff like that. It's like, man, that was just kind of like garbage advice, So, cool. Let's go on to the next one. So, and this kind of goes back to what we were just chatting about earlier, but I think this is a good question is like, how often do you think beginners should change their exercises? And like, when it comes to advanced, do you think that they should change them more often or less often than beginners?
Yeah. If we're not going to just do a whole another monologue of what we just talked about, I think the answer is as little as possible. That isn't to say never. And it's not even that you can't change from one meso to the next. You can, but the answer is as little as possible. And you should have a reason for changing. And you should have a bit of like an innocent until proven guilty mentality, right? You should have a keep it unless if it ain't broke mentality, right? So as little as possible. And right now, what I'm experimenting with is, again, I'm not every single person, but I at least know for me right now that I could run these exercises 3 mesos in a row and PR every time. And so if I'm within that 3 meso as of now, maybe we talking 3, 4, 5 mesos, I'm still progressing on everything. But as of what I know right now is within a 3 mesocycle period, like performance drop off is not a reason for me to stop doing something. It's clear I can keep progressing meso to meso. And that's me with my circumstance, with my nutritional status, my recovery, my exercise selection, my training split. But and of one here, I'm like, you know what, within a couple of mesos, 3-ish, there's performance wise, there's no reason to change something. That doesn't mean I can't have an emotional reason to want to change something, and an enjoyment and an educational. I mean, there are times where I'm like, I'll give this whole speech to a client and they're like, you know what, I want to keep everything the same. I heard what you said. That sounds fucking awesome. Let's try it. And then I'm like, well, actually, there's a couple things I want to make you do from an educational standpoint. So we're going to put those in, we're going to bypass what I just said, and I'm going to put a couple things in because I want you to learn. And so, yeah, as little as possible, make sure you have a reason. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. But at the same time, I feel like I'm been on a couple podcasts lately giving this speech. At the same time, and this is why I had a client yesterday. At the end of the speech, I needed to add this at the end. Also, you hear all of this. It's good to keep it the same. You avoid this like transitional period of learning shit, and you can get right down to business. All of this. I don't want people to feel bad about changing stuff either. Like, you can change stuff and still get amazing progress. Might not take you fucking 5 weeks to figure it out. Maybe it takes you 1 week. So in the same vein, I don't want to flip people into the other extreme of like feeling bad about changing something. That's bullshit. You getting 4 workouts a week and training hard over the course of your life is way more of a variable that I care about than like it's same meso to meso. So in that same vein, I don't want anybody to listen to that and be like, well, when I change something, I'm really fucking up, man. My stimulus and my gains are going to really take it. No, they're not. They're not. But, technically a smidge, maybe. But definitely don't feel bad about changing things. Just take all of that into account.
Yeah, it kind of goes back to what I said, just because it's like not the most optimal way to go. It's like it's not like you're not, it's like, oh, because you switch, you're not seeing any muscle growth now. Like you still are. Just again, like you said, maybe you could see a little bit more if you stayed with the same. But like you said, don't feel bad about switching. Just I think really just don't do it like all the time and for like no reason, right? I think that's really what you want to try to avoid there. Yep. Cool. So let's go on to the next one. So if I have more than 15 sets for a leg day session, should I split it and do the other half the next session, or should you do it all in one session?
Run it one more time.
Yeah, if I have more than 15 sets for a leg day session, should I split it in half and then do the other half next session, or should you do it all in one?
Yeah, my assumption is that 15 is a number that you are thinking like might violate a per session volume metric. That's a general recommendation that somebody's That's the context you think?
I believe it was like, hey, I've heard, doing too many sets in one session isn't great for muscle growth.
So we just start with a theory of that is true. There is such a thing of I've done so many sets in this session, or let's replace sets with I've done X amount of work, and the quality of my work is starting to drop off to a degree where I can consider doing this another day. It's like a 6-hour study session. The last 2 hours of that study session might be as good as 30 minutes of a higher quality session. So you might say, instead of 6 hours, I do 2 times 3 hours, whatever. Just that concept, understanding that there's probably a diminishing return in effort as you get more fatigued. And the last stuff you do at the end might be so shitty that you'd probably be better off doing it on another day. The problem is that set numbers just aren't helpful here. What if you were doing leg extension, ham curl, calf raise, adductor machine? You could do 50 sets of those and you would not reach this breaking this volume per session volume metric here. So it's the same issue with like how many sets per muscle group per week question. I need to know what you're doing. I need to know what exercises you're doing, how strong, like we talked about, your experience level, what your nutritional status is like, how close you're going to failure. I mean, if you're doing 15 sets of RDL, back squat, walk and lunge, Bulgarian split squat, maybe split that in half, but what if you're doing all those things 4 or 5 RIR, and I know that I'm using an extreme example to kind of pick that apart. If we're taking a relative session of like an RDL, a glute bridge, a ham curl, and a calf raise or something like that, I think you could do 15 total sets of those, let's say 3 to 4 sets of each of those, and you could survive. But I think it's important to take the general recommendation. I think there's probably a general recommendation out there that I'm not thinking of. I don't know if 15 seems high enough to me to be a definite, hey, we should start to consider this. But 15 sets of legs, if it's high fatiguing exercise, is certainly a lot. But I would take an understanding that it's possible that the stuff at the end is getting the shit end of the stick. And to at least just look inward and consider that. I mean, are you doing RDLs for 3 sets, leg press for 4 sets, we're at 7 sets, leg extension for 4 sets, we're at 11 sets, and then ham curls for 4 sets, and you're at 15 sets? Are you doing that workout, and do you feel like leg extension and ham curl are just, you're mailing it in? Or do you not feel that way? Do you feel like, yeah, my ham curls I'm progressing with them, and I'm able to train to failure. I'm not feeling like, I'm mailing it in on those. Okay, great. You're good to go then. So I would understand the concept of it's possible the stuff at the end of the session is getting you're too fatigued, that the quality of the work is so low that it's worth considering splitting it up. But it's also possible that you're totally fine. Listen, the frequency of training, how many times you train per week, is really just, in my opinion, a modulator of volume. Like, it's, if you need lots of work, if you really are a person who needs lots of sets, which totally another discussion, then you'll probably need lots of days. And so, because if you need, let's say you needed, like, I don't know, the fucking 100 sets per week total, like, you're not doing that in 3 workouts, right? Probably doing that six workouts, for example, whatever. And so I would just acknowledge that this phenomenon of it's possible that I'm doing so much that the later stuff sucks exists, and just ask yourself, is that actually happening?
Yeah, no, that's a really good answer, because that is kind of like you said, it's a very tough question to just answer just based on the information we got, right? Because you really don't know. Like you said, it's going to be so dependent on like your exercise selection. Like you said, if you're picking more fatiguing exercises, then yeah, 15 sets is going to be a lot. But like you said, if they're less fatiguing, it's like, it's not going to be as tough on the body, and you might be able to get away with that. And also, this was one thing too that when I saw that question, I was wondering too, like, and I'm sure, what muscle groups are you actually hitting? Because the legs are just like a very, it's a lot of different muscle groups, right? So if it's like all quads, then it's like, I'm sure, again, that's going to be something that's going to change how you would recommend that, right? Hamstrings, are you doing is it 15 sets of hamstrings? Are we talking 7 and 7? Right. I think that's
mixed leg day. Yeah.
That's going to be a big thing too, because I think people hear leg day and they just think it's, but it's just all your legs. But I also think like it's also dependent on which muscle groups you're hitting. Now, again, if it's, go ahead.
No, you go. I'll go.
I was just going to say, again, that I think that's dependent on your exercise selection there with that. Like, again, if it's very fatiguing exercises, then again, 15 is going to be a lot, but yeah.
If you're doing a lot of sets of the same muscle group, then we have to look at this limitation via like local fatigue. So if you're like 15 sets of hamstrings, then it's more likely that the later work, your hamstrings are so toast that the quality is lower. If you're just doing a full on leg day, it is less likely that locally you run into this issue, and more potentially likely that you run into it systemically, where you're just exhausted generally and your effort is low generally. But if you're doing like, if you imagine you had a bicep day, I probably wouldn't do 15 sets of biceps in one day, because locally you're probably going to run into this issue a smidge quicker. Systemically, you probably could handle it just fine. But the last 5 sets of bicep curls, you might be like, you know what? Higher quality if I do them on another day. Totally possible.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, definitely being more specific in terms of what actual muscle group you're working out, I think can be super helpful there. So next question is, any difference between like plate loaded machines and like technogym / cable machines? Is there any difference in terms of like gains there if you were to use one or the other?
Any difference between those machines?
Like a plate loaded one, right? So like your hammer strength plate loaded ones versus like a cable stack one, or even just like cable machines in general.
Yeah, there's going to be differences. Definitely. If we're looking at hammer strength, all of them are pretty short position biased, I guess. It's just mostly a resistance profile, but honestly, those things they're not even that different. Cables are inherently short overloaded, not by a ton, but a little bit, just based on like the further you pull the cable, the more friction is being built. So just a little bit they're similar. I'm not so sure I would break it down to those categories. I might look at the machines a little bit more individually. I think a plate loaded cable stack or a selectorized cable stack, if it's the same machine, then I wouldn't try and discern big differences. I don't suspect there would be. If you're looking at a plate loaded like a hammer strength machine, I would just look at each machine individually, because some machines like the chest supported row hammer strength, you can turn the resistance profile. You can switch it a little bit by doing a step back variation. So you can modify those a little bit. I suspect from just a machine standpoint, machines are usually less customizable from a execution standpoint. You're usually locked into some arm position. Not always. Some machines have like multiple grips. I know there's the technogym chest press, which is a converging chest press. It has pronated grip and it has a neutral grip, and it converges. I think the grips are way too wide, but it has a couple of options, whereas a cable is like fully customizable. I can move the cable up, down. I can step back. I can grab the handle. I can grab the knob. I can, move my arm in any position. So cables are extremely customizable. Machines, you're going to be locked into what the machine is made for, which you can change a smidge, here and there with just some like nuanced understanding of like how to manipulate the movement, but you're more locked into what they want you to do. Good machines will allow for more variability there. Less good machines usually, it's kind of, I'm thinking of like a non-converging pronated only chest press. It's like not as good as like the Nautilus one that has a neutral grip, also converges. And so there's going to be a wide variety. I would probably look at it more on like an N of one, just take each machine as it is.
Yeah, kind of basically what you're saying there is like kind of feel it out for yourself too, see if it's solid for you. And when you say like converges and stuff like that, I guess you're talking about how like with hammer strength, it's pretty much like the handles are in place, whereas like something I'm thinking about is like Arsenal machines. I'm not sure if you use those, but like Arsenal row, like they have the handles that kind of can move different ways and stuff like that. And that's a way I guess that you can really...
the chest press that converge, I just mean that your arms get closer together as you press and they get wider as they come down.
I see.
Which the hammer strength one does do that, but the hammer strength one only has one grip option. Whereas what you're talking about with the Arsenal ones, they have the like a free moving handle, which I love those. The Arsenal machines are awesome, but yeah, there's no but. That is the difference. That would be one thing that would make those two machines different for sure. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, because I think people think that like, oh, this particular machine is bad, or if like you do these like again hammer, like if you do plate loaded or like you do technogym type stuff, then it's just bad, right? But I think
I love some technogym machines. Technogym gets shit on. I think that there are some machines that are just trash and some things that are overcomplicated, let's say. But when I go to a hotel, it's got technogym, I'm amped. I don't know how technogym got this like inside track for the luxury hotel market, but when I have a client who goes on vacation, I go on vacation, we got technogym, I'm stoked. I think there's some really good machines. We went to Mexico and the gym had technogym. I was like, oh my God, it's like fantastic. At least compared to like expectations, certainly fantastic. I would more so just look at the machine on its own, not make any gross assumptions about like all of one brand or all of another brand.
I felt that way too. There was when actually I think we were in Mexico around the same time, actually back in June. And like me and my fiance were working out at the gym there, and there was a row machine, dude, that like I was like, this is gonna suck, but I used it and I was like, man, this thing just freaking hits. I was like, I wish I could bring this back. But I did use their leg press, and that thing just freaking like sucked. I'm sure there's probably a few machines that you've tried too where it's just like, this just sucks. There's no way I'm ever gonna be able. I would never use this if I
Sure.
had to use this regularly.
Definitely.
Cool. So how to know when to add volume to a program? I'm sure this is probably one that you get all the freaking time, and I feel like this is a very common question. I'm just kind of curious to hear what your thought is around it and whatnot.
Yeah, I think the additional volume, once you're in a ballpark of what is likely to produce results that would allow for progression week to week, which I think is a pretty wide range of volume. You know, I'm good just arbitrarily like in the 6 to 12 direct, whatever. Even could be even whatever. Let's say 6 to 12 sets per muscle group per week. If you're also counting like ancillary work from like biceps and pull-ups and whatever, however you're calculating, it's again a shitty way of describing it. But once you're in a ballpark of like this is a reasonable amount of volume to expect growth from, if you get to a point where you're not progressing on something, but you're also not highly, highly fatigued, so you're getting to a point where you're like not progressing, but you also don't feel super beat up, that's usually an indication that you could survive from more volume. You could potentially, like, people are like, well, I've plateaued on a lift. What should I do? One of the options you have is, well, you're just not getting enough of a stimulus to adapt to get stronger. You could do more. That is one option on that list. It actually might be the last option I would go with. Chances are there are inputs that you need to fix: better sleep, better nutrition, training closer to failure on average, increasing or improving technique, maybe even picking better exercises. If you're doing all those things, you can consider adding volume. Now, I wouldn't make that the first thing that you look at. I would make those other things what you look at first. It's a tough question, as you can see, like slightly dancing around it. You can't be very direct. Over time, I guess my own approach is I've learned an amount of volume that I think is adequate, that I can recover from for 4 to 6 weeks and progress really well. Now that probably is fluid. There's probably I could do a little bit more and survive. I could probably do a little bit less and still see gains. And I'll use, first of all, remember like this person's saying volume as sets. You're always increasing volume if you're going up in reps or weight or adding pauses, changing tempo, whatever things you're doing, improving technique. Like the actual tension is what needs to increase. The stimulus needs to increase. Adding a set is just one method of doing that. And let's just be very clear. Adding a set is an atomic bomb of additional volume compared to like an extra rep. So I would make sure that when you're looking at progression week to week, that I would more highly, once you're in the ballpark of enough sets, I would more highly value or more highly prioritize the use of increased reps, getting closer to failure, increasing load, getting closer to failure. And personally, I don't add sets. Once I'm in that ballpark, I will lean more heavily on those two forms of progression, getting closer to failure via more reps or more weight. And then I will add likely intensification techniques instead. Like something about showing up after 3 weeks of doing 3 sets of RDLs and having to do a 4th set of RDL just makes me want to blow my brains out. It's just really demoralizing for me personally. But let's take like a glute bridge where maybe, again, I've been working with 3 sets and something I'm getting geared up mentally for, and I show up on week 4 or 5 and maybe I added a myo rep, or maybe I added a tempo range of motion drop into hip thrusts. That to me is more palatable and a slightly smaller, although fairly similar increase in volume. You're adding several more close to failure reps, but from an emotional standpoint, like even an extra set of like curls or something, maybe I'm being a little bitch about it, but I'm more highly motivated and more likely going to put forth better effort if I show up and I'm like, I got to do an extra myo rep, a couple of myo reps at the end of this, instead of like, I got a whole nother set. So I'll straight up, I don't increase volume. I might increase it in between mesos if I look back and I'm like, this, I really could have survived from a lot more, or survived a lot more. I might look back at a whole meso and be like, even with these myo rep progressions, even with load and rep progressions, this wasn't enough. And I could have progressed more. I wasn't fatigued. I wasn't feeling sore at all. Progressing fine. That might be something I would do. But after going through the motions for years, I'm at a place where I'm not necessarily making that mistake. I'm at a point where I'm like, I know. And I'd almost rather, like, what's the goal there? The goal is, hey, I could survive from more, right? And I could survive from more so I could make more gains. When you realize that, you can look at a lot of variables. You can add a set, you can add a myo rep. I am at this point leaning on, okay, I could survive from more. Let me start a little closer to failure. And that is not the best SFR decision. That is not how I would make the absolute best gains. Probably an additional set would be how I would do that. But I think to me, it has the best stimulus to time ratio, which is more thing that I'm concerned with. And I haven't felt the fatigue effects to a point where I'm worried about starting closer to failure. To me, I don't want to add more time to the workout, but where if I feel like I need more stimulus, how can I do that? So that's kind of a long-winded answer there.
Well, it is, again, this is a complicated answer where you can't just like, say, hey, this is what you would do. Because like you said, again, there's so many different things where it's like, are they talking about sets? And typically people are talking about sets. So it's like, what are you talking about with volume? So there's a lot of things to kind of unpack here, but I think you summed it up good. So really what it sounds like is for you, it's like mostly, hey, if I feel like I can do more, it's mostly going to come down to how can I add a little bit more like quality to this set before I go and just add another set, because like you said, that's going to be a large increase in volume.
I'll lean more heavily on myos. My group knows full well that when I've added sets in the past, people don't like it. And I'm not saying that we're having a discussion of optimal. We're talking about optimal. We're also talking about practical. And so we feel way more comfortable adding a myo. I feel like I get way more effort out of my group. I get way more effort out of myself. It's way less daunting to rest 10 seconds and do another couple of reps than like have to put the weights down for 2 minutes and then do another 8 wasted warm up lead in reps to get another couple of close to failure reps. I just find that to be a bit more of a palatable progression. And the question is like, are you working with clients that really like pre-programming volume increases? To me doesn't make much sense at all. I used to do this a lot. I was like, and it would almost be like out of like an antsy feeling of like, oh, they're probably going to need more volume by week 4. But like, where the fuck was I coming up with that from? It just was like kind of a hunch. But like, if you're progressing in your program, I'm not saying don't change anything, because even if you're progressing, you could progress better potentially, whatever. But if you're progressing, it's a pretty damn good sign that like at least strongly consider not changing anything.
Yeah, no, 100%. No, I like that again. And so like for you, I guess with the mile reps, so basically it would just be like, say, just hypothetically, you're doing like 3 sets of bicep curls. And like, basically for that, they feel like maybe they could do a little bit more there. You would just basically add in like, hey, 1 mile rep set essentially
at the end of the last set.
At the end of the last set. And that would be kind of how you would go about increasing volume. Do you find that 1 set's typically enough? Or I know it's really going to depend on the person, but do you find that like week over week you're having to add another set, or is it usually, hey, 1 set typically does the trick here for most people?
Yeah, it's definitely. I feel like if you take the first week and you're working at like an average of a 2 or 3 RIR, by the time they need more stimulus, they only need a tiny bit, and they're also working really close to failure. And so your risk is higher because you're dealing with someone who's already working really close to failure. I worked with Steve. I worked with not with Steve. I worked with Ryan with Revive Stronger, and I always felt like those volume increases came in combination with RIR decreases.
Yeah.
So I was always increasing a set on a week where I was also pushing closer to failure on everything. And I felt like that was an atomic bomb. It's like, hey, peak week, we're going to add a set. We're not just adding a set. We're adding a failure set on top of 3 failure sets, for example. And so I was like, those two things happened in conjunction. So I'm thinking like, what's a slightly more incremental volume jump? And if we're being totally honest, in my own program, which we talked about kind of prior, I'll use this only on so what I'm doing right now with pull-ups is if I have a week where I just don't progress at all, I will force progression via an eccentric only rep. So like I'm doing 3 sets of 5 to 10 really wide grip pull-ups with a pause at the top. I did 6, 6, 6, 6 the week before. And this week I did 6, 6, 6, 6, and then I couldn't get that 7th one, but I forced progression because I know I'm, kind of near the end of the meso. So I'm not so worried about like, oh my God, you're going beyond failure. You're going to be so fatigued. Like I know my deload is soon. And so I will force the progression with an eccentric. And that's what I'm doing with the group, the overhead press. I'm like, hey, if you have a week where you try your darndest and you do not progress at all on anything on that last set, you will force progression with an added knee drive or added leg drive. But I'm hoping that that's only happening in weeks 3, 4, 5.
Yeah, later on.
Because that risk factor of going beyond failure is higher, just because you're probably carrying on average more fatigue then. So I only start saying that in week 3 in the program, but hopefully I realistically would rather it just happen in week 4 and 5, I guess.
Yeah, no, super interesting. Yeah, that makes sense. I definitely want to do it later on. And yeah, I could see where if you had a set like towards the end of a mesocycle, like you said, you're already doing closer to failure. That's just like you said, almost an atomic bomb on everything. So awesome. Well, let's wrap this up. Is there anything for you coming up? I know you are getting married somewhat soon, so I don't know you, and when are you?
Yeah, we're accepting Venmo. No, I'm just kidding. We're getting married in April. We're planning the honeymoon. We're going to Africa. We're going to Kenya for 2 weeks. So
Dang,
fucking pumped.
awesome.
Um, yeah, really excited about that. And anything else? We got some merch coming out for the group, hopefully
Sweet.
by the end of the mesocycle, but I'm the worst with that. It's like I don't know about you, but like if there's something I'm really like interested in doing, I get it done. And if it's something on the
Yep.
fringe that I'm just finding it really difficult to do, but I'm putting an
Put it
effort into
off.
it, we're gonna get some merch going. So anyway, whatever, you keep an eye out for that, but whatever. Yeah.
Awesome, man. Yeah, no, that's awesome, and that's cool. So April, you guys are getting married. So you got a few months, 5 more months, I guess. So awesome. All right, Jordan. We'll appreciate your time, and we'll obviously get you on here again in the future.
Thanks a lot, dude. I appreciate you having me.